Hello, everybody. So, let's face it, we all live difficult lives. The stress and hardships of life just can't seem to go away. Schoolwork, chores, and projects just stack like massive landfills. And this continues on into adulthood, where issues like relationship, financial, or work management issues just cloud the depths of our mind. It just seems impossible to catch a break nowadays, and sensationalist news really do not help with this. Now, this portrayal of the life of the average citizen in a developed nation may sound bad to other people living in these developed nations. Somebody living in a less fortunate nation would be willing to do almost anything for the living standards that we just call mediocre. Let's take another example. School cafeteria food, particularly in the United States. Many American students may consider their cafeteria food to be bland, gross, or just outright inedible. Yet, the same foods that us Americans call inedible are also the same foods that some people around the world would be absolutely dying to get their hands upon. For example. Now, this may all sound a little bit cliche, something that your parents may lecture you about when you refuse to eat your vegetables at the dinner table. But please, let me elaborate. Let's paint another side to this argument now. We shouldn't just limit ourselves to only recognizing the differences between the developed and developing, but we should also recognize the differences between developed countries themselves. For example, someone who has lived in the United States for all their lives has developed a vastly different culture and lifestyle to somebody who has lived in Japan for their entire lives. Yet, we subconsciously group both of these countries together when comparing them to less fortunate nations. It's funny, isn't it, how we're able to connect with one another through the smallest of links like that. With these points in mind, we have to consider this about our world. We need to view ourselves in a global perspective, realize our differences, and try to connect and empathize with people who have a vastly different culture and lifestyle to us. Now, what do I mean by the global perspective? Well, instead of just telling you straight away, I'm going to provide an example so that you can follow along. When you think of America, what may come to mind? Could it be freedom, burgers, cowboys? Well, these are all common stereotypes of America. And why did you think of these stereotypes in particular, if you thought about this? Well, one reason why could be the fact that the American lifestyle that we are surrounded upon is so immersed in this idea of symbolic liberation that we just come to accept these aspects of American culture as part of our own, even if we don't necessarily enjoy eating burgers. Now, that is just one perspective of America, and it's by us Americans ourselves. What might other groups of people think of America? Let's take the example of natives. What might they think of America? Well, due to America's complicated history, some native groups of people may view America as a nation built on the colonization of their ancestral lands, and therefore have massive grievances against America as a country. Now, let's take another example. What might Europeans think of America? Well, they may see them as loud, obnoxious, or annoying. But why? Why is it that they think these stereotypes? Well, could it be because of the fact that a vast number of American tourists visit Europe's urban centers, yet hold no respect for the European traditions and cultures there? Or could it be due to the long-standing stereotypes of America itself that influence the minds of these other groups of people? So, as you can see, there are many different stereotypes of America that exist and persist. And we think in different ways based on our upbringing and our background. That is what I mean by the global perspective. We have to consider and value different points of view because, ironically, realizing and celebrating our different viewpoints is what ultimately brings us closer together. So, let's go back to these Native and European examples. Now, us Americans may get a little bit unflattered at these opinions or stereotypes that they may have of us, but we also have to realize that we have our own stereotypes of these groups of people as well. For example, Native Americans are commonly stereotyped in American popular culture, whether it be due to appropriated brand names or professional sports teams. And we cannot ignore the fact that we have plenty of stereotypes of different European groups. For example, let's take the British. Us Americans may view the British as loving tea and crumpets, or having poor dental hygiene. Now, due to our own stereotypes of these different groups of people, it is quite understandable why they have their own stereotypes of us in return. Now, in order to develop a global perspective, we have to consider and realize why people think the way they do. There's obvious reasons as to why natives and Europeans have these preconceived notions of Americans, because we wouldn't have realized this if it wasn't for the global perspective. Like, for example, displaced natives would obviously have some feelings of resentment and frustration at America because their ancestors had been exiled from their native homelands, from non-Native American settlers. Yet, when us non-Native Americans hear about this, we may start to get a bit defensive, closed-minded. We refuse to listen to these criticisms that these different groups of people have of us. And that is the glaring issue of the modern world. We are not open-minded. Now, this is a major issue in the modern world, and we refuse to come out of our bubbles and learn about these different perspectives. That is how a majority of wars nowadays occur. We just simply do not want to listen to what others have to say. And this fact that we are not open-minded is also a reason why there's a common stereotype that Americans are ignorant or uncultured. I mean, what's the capital of Paris again? Am I right? Don't actually answer that question. Now, we need to learn how to develop the global perspective. And it's really difficult because if we've never experienced what it's like of being displaced from our native homelands by these non-native settlers, we don't know what it's like to experience these. So why should we care? That is a problem of the modern era. We are also not tolerant and not empathetic. But how can we try to empathize with these different groups of people when we do not share the same life experiences that they do? how do we know what it's like to be them? Well, before we answer that question, we have to hammer in the point that celebrating our diversity and differences in viewpoints is what ultimately brings us closer together. So, let's rewind back a bit. The world is scared of the other. And what I mean by that is whenever we see different cultures, different groups of people whose traditions differ from ours, we become scared. And not scared in a traditional sense, as in we scream or yell in terror. We become scared in a form of anxiety. We become anxious when we see these foreign, different cultures. And to respond to this anxiety, we may possibly commit dangerous, hateful acts of prejudice or racism. We are simply too scared to learn of the diversity that the world truly does have. And instead of building a barrier to all these different foreign cultures, instead of preventing ourselves from learning, we should instead try to build a bridge of tolerance, a bridge of acceptance. We need to build a bridge because a bridge is what builds a connection. A barrier separates it. So, when we do build this bridge of acceptance and tolerance, we realize that these different groups of people aren't always that different from us in reality. We can form new bonds with different people when we open ourselves up to learning about their experiences and who they are. So, let's go back to the question. How can you be empathetic towards a group of people whose life experiences vastly differ from your own? Well, the first step is to simply be accepted. Even if you've never experienced what they have in their lifetimes and don't know what it's like to be them, just try to accept them. And when you do accept them, you'll learn that they do truly appreciate it on the inside, even if they don't outwardly show it. It's just that it's sometimes difficult for some people to immediately be accepting or tolerating of others' gestures because they've been taught all their lives to just build a barrier and not a bridge. Now, within the past few years, there's been a sharp rise in the number of individuals who have advocated for ideas of tolerance and acceptance. And this number will continue to rise for many years to come. And this is great towards trying to get the world to figure out about the global perspective. And when the world does figure out about the global perspective, we will finally have no more wars and we will achieve potential world peace. However, the problem with this is to get everybody to learn about the global perspective. Now, as I stated earlier, a massive number of individuals, especially in the 20th and 21st century, have been advocating for these ideas of tolerance and acceptance. But let's view the other side of the coin. There's been a large number of individuals within these past few years who have instead advocated and encouraged ideas of authoritarianism, hatred, violence, and prejudice. That's why it is more important now than ever to encourage ideas of tolerance and acceptance and kindness. Because at the current state the world is heading towards, hate may overtake acceptance. Now, there is a quote by some unknown person, but it's really thought-provoking. Any small step forward is a great step forward. we can apply this to learning about the global perspective through just accepting other people through small steps. Don't try to immediately be friendly to everybody, because that is not a good way to truly understand ideas of the global perspective and tolerating others. It is difficult to just instantly cross to that bridge rather than taking slow steps. And we can do this, practice this, and through just accepting others. Instead of just looking at strangers weirdly, let's just tolerate them. Just look at them normally and greet them. And this may sound like a very small, minuscule step, but it's still a great step nonetheless. And soon, you'll learn to accept these various strangers and realize they do not always have ulterior or aggressive motives behind them. And you'll realize they are not necessarily all that different from you. You may form new bonds with people who you may have never previously considered interacting with before. And step by step, the world will learn the global perspective and realize we are not that different from each other after all. Thank you so much, everybody.